Hey everyone, my name is Fraser Cain. I'm the publisher of Universe Today, and it is Friday, April 17th, 2015, and this is your weekly space hangout. So joining us this week, we've got Morgan Rehnberg. Hey Morgan.
Hey Fraser.
And man, I don't know how to say this. I'm going to probably put her in a bind, but we've got Amy Shira Teitel joining us. Special guest.
Back after ages.
Amy,
special guest.
After ages. You get an email nagging you every week, and the guilt just piles up and piles up. And
Wore me
but we
down.
were able to
Wore me
down. We wore you down, and we brought you back.
I know. I'm sorry.
Me?
Hi guys.
So we got a bunch of stories this week. We're going to be talking about man, what are we talking about? We're going to talk about the Falcon 9 launch and almost landing, the plans to build a Europa probe, what happened when Philae bounced on Rosetta's Comet, new pictures of Pluto, and some update on Ceres and the surface map of the planet, of the dwarf planet. But we're also going to take some time and just talk to Amy about, like what you're doing, what's happening, what's going on. But as you know, this is an interactive show. You can talk to us, and the way you can do that is use the Q&A app. So if you are watching this video right now, there's a link that says we're interacting with the audience. Click that, and you will you'll sort of still be able to watch the video, but then you'll be able to ask questions. And just to prove that this is a true thing, I'm going to say hello to Elad Avron, Nancy Graziano, Tom Van Scotter, Tony Lynch, Giselle Sabarine, Helga Bierkog, Graham Ash, Bert Wolters, Michael Jobin, Jim Meeker, Guido Bibra, Hugo Burnham, Andrew Planet, Stephen Hawkins, Leonard Lindstrom, and I think that's everybody. So, hey everybody, thanks for joining us live. We really appreciate it. Let's get on with this show. So, Amy Shira Teitel, you appear to be living really close to some kind of propulsion lab. What's going on?
Yes, there is a propulsion laboratory of jets that is very near to me. What's going on in Pasadena? Yeah, I recently moved to Pasadena, where I live quite close to JPL, and yeah, a fringe benefit of living in Pasadena is knowing a lot of people who do amazing stuff at JPL, and also getting to go to JPL. And we didn't actually talk about this in the pre-show, but I should have told you that I actually got to go to JPL a couple weeks ago for the LDSD spin test, which was super cool. Apparently, it's really hard to get into the clean rooms. I didn't know that people I know have been there for like a decade and have gotten in once.
To go into the clean room, or to see the clean room
into the clean
from above?
room, no, anyone can do that when you go on a tour. I got to put on the little lunch lady
any jerk can
cap.
stand above and watch them working in the clean room.
Yeah, I got to go in the high bay 2 and the main high bay, and right. So should I go through what LDSD is for people that might not know? I guess.
Yeah, of course.
It's the new it's the low density supersonic decelerator, and it is this sort of flying saucer looking thing. The videos are super cool, and I should have looked up a link. The videos are super cool, and it sort of inflates and increases its surface area as it falls, so that it can actually decelerate faster in a thinner atmosphere. And this is great for landing on Mars, where you have a thin atmosphere and need to slow down. So they're testing it off the coast of Hawaii. They did one test last year, and it was awesome, and they're doing another one this year. And the LDSD has no gyroscope or anything on board. It's just spin stabilized. So what they do is they spin it on a stand in the high bay to make sure that it's balanced. And I got to go watch that spin test.
That sounds terrifying.
Awesome.
Yeah. I mean, this is a great technology.
Only going yeah, it's really, really cool. The spin test was only 30 revs a minute, so it wasn't actually as fast as you think it would be. But just being able to go in and okay, this thing is going to be shot into space and then accelerated to Mach 4, and it's 15 feet away from me right now, and that's really cool.
Yeah, Nancy wrote a great article for Universe Today about, I'm thinking 6 or 7 years ago, about the problem with getting heavy payloads to Mars. And the big problem with the Martian atmosphere is that all of the probes that have gone there so far, things like Curiosity or things like Spirit and Opportunity especially, they were able to use retro rockets and parachutes, and then they used that crazy the airbag solution that it used.
Oh yeah.
Curiosity was a lot heavier, and they had to use that sky crane. But that's kind of the limit for the current technology.
But even Curiosity, yeah, they're still using Viking-era architecture in terms of like the entry aeroshell and the parachutes and stuff, and they're actually using a different kind of parachute, theoretically, for Mars, using the LDSD. I think they're switching from I think they have been using a disc gap band parachute, and they're switching to a ring sail, which can apparently take higher loads, which is really, really interesting. Parachutes are neat. Yeah, so all kinds of weird challenges. Mars's atmosphere. You can't ignore it, but you also can't really get that much help.
To try and get like large spacecraft, perhaps HABs and launch vehicles and greenhouses and things like the kinds of stuff that people are going to want to actually live on the surface of Mars. There's no technology right now that anyone has that will let that happen. Everything that you fire at Mars right now would just go splat. And so this is what they're starting to work on, is some of these new technologies. So yeah, that's great that you got a chance to see that up close. When I was at JPL, the clean room was mostly empty. So we just had to imagine, Curiosity in there and Viking and things like that. And all we just saw was just this mostly empty room with some spacecraft being built in the corner. So now that's one thing that you did, which is that you like literally just go and just stare like creepily at JPL as people go to and from their jobs building spacecraft.
To be clear, I don't actually lurk in bushes.
You lurk on the internet, yeah. But you've been doing some work with Discovery.
Yes, I've been working with D News for a few months now. Yeah, we do fun science on the internet for people.
That's very different from what we do here.
I know. Well, we're a little bit more scripted and a little bit more filmed and edited as opposed to just showing up and at my desk and bringing you into my world of science. Is this the lead-in for me to talk about series, by the way? Because I recently did a
we want to talk about the projects that you're working on. This is the kind of things that you have to pay. Is you are our special guest, Amy, so we're going to talk about the things that you're working on.
Yeah, this is I'm not used to being, a guest. Yeah, no, D News. It's fun. It's nice to do sort of short episodes about science, and for me personally, I do so much space, and I love space, but I get to branch out into all kinds of weird things. Just like any question that piques my interest can be an episode. I think the last one I did the other day was a link between protein supplements and a rise in testicular cancer, which is not something I would ever look into because, I'm not a man. But it was really interesting. I learned a lot about how supplements work, and it's fun to learn. And
yeah, I mean, you're actually writing these things as well as presenting them sometimes, right?
Yeah, which is my favorite thing about it, is that it's not like someone says, here, do this, you're just the head on TV. It's like, oh, here, do this. Go research it, write it, we'll approve it, film it. Make sure we edit out any time that you can't say words and make it look all professional. But yeah, it's just exactly what I do, only then I read the article instead of just putting it on my blog or something. Yeah.
That's awesome. And then you also are working on a book, right?
Yeah, that's the big one. That's why I sort of don't really know what's going on in the world, space or otherwise, right now. My book is coming out. I'm about a month away from manuscript deadline, which is a little bit scary. And the book is coming out in the UK in September and in the US in January. It's already pre-ordered on Amazon. And it is I kind of describe it, and the subheading is the subtitle is A Prehistory of Spaceflight, because I've always been, one of the big questions that I'm always asked by anybody is, if we got to the moon in 9 years, thanks Apollo, if we got to the moon in 9 years, why are we not on Mars yet? And it's sort of, okay, barring all the political stuff, the technological stuff, the funding stuff, people look at Apollo and sort of forget that there was a lot of backstory to Apollo. It wasn't like NASA was created in a vacuum and all of a sudden was like, we're going to go to the moon, let's figure it out. It was, okay, we've been looking at rockets for 30 years, and we've been developing the systems to keep men alive in a near space environment for 10 years. How can we put all these things together to create a fully functioning space agency? So it's looking at all of the backstory, which is really interesting, including my favorite, some of the early military proposals for spaceflight programs, which were just nuts. Some of them were really measured and sort of like, we're going to do a very slow and deliberate exploration, and then Sputnik happened, and then everyone's like, all right, manned base on the moon by 1964. Let's do it, and just went nuts. And it was just sort of this like really incredible push. And this is stuff that is just not, we just don't talk about pre-NASA spaceflight programs very much, aside from like von Braun's idea for the 70-man first mission to Mars, which is bonkers and awesome. But there's a lot of really, really neat prehistory that's just underexplored, and it's really fun to explore it. I'm getting, as it comes together, I'm getting really excited to share it with everybody.
I just did some work on animals in space, and there was a lot of monkeys smashed into the planet.
A lot.
There was a lot of really sad things done to animals as they tried to figure out if they could fly in space. Could humans? One of my classic favorites of this is with Ham the chimp, where they taught him to pull levers and knobs and twist things and press buttons and in exchange for bananas and to avoid electric shocks. And just this idea that they didn't even know if an astronaut could like work his arms in space and to do the kinds of tasks required. And then Ham went up and was eating bananas and turning knobs that didn't do anything. Although I'm sure he thought he was flying the rocket. But
wasn't Ham also the one that there was a short circuit and every time he pulled the right lever he got a shock?
Well, he was that's right. He was supposed to avoid certain levers because they would give him shocks. So I don't know. I think that was.
Yeah, but he just got shocked all the time.
Yeah, shocked all the time.
There was
poor Ham.
There was a lot of like one of the great like little anecdotes, just like a side story that I found out in reading some stuff for this was in the 30s. Brown was interested in what acceleration might do on a living being, so he built a centrifuge in the room that he was renting and put mice in it, but the mice didn't always stay in the centrifuge. And I think if I'm remembering the story right, he got kicked out because the landlady kept finding blood splatters all over the wall.
Oh. He had to know. So when is the book come out?
Had to figure out. September in the UK. And January in the U.S. and Canada. I am not sure. It's pre-ordered on Amazon already. It's called Breaking the Chains of Gravity. I should say that.
Breaking the Chains of what?
Amazon says Breaking the Chains of Gravity.
Breaking the Chains
of
Gravity.
Like rockets.
Got it.
Rocketing off the ground and breaking the chains of gravity. Already on Amazon, and it says delivery by October 22nd, and if you pre-ordered it, I do not think it will be there on October 22nd, so I apologize. Not that I have anything to do with that date, but yeah, we're looking at January.
So I got a question for you from Alexander Howlett, which is, Amy, can you tell us about your methodology for approaching the book? I'm interested how you structure a history project of this scale.
Yeah, me too. I guess I should sort of go into a little bit of the backstory that, like, I had this idea for sort of, this is a history that's really fascinated me for ages, and the impetus was my master's thesis, which was about failed landing technologies in the 60s, which sort of set me on this path of kind of going back, and it was really like a trial and error thing. I mean, this is my first full book on my own, right? So there was a lot of just like structuring it and trying to figure it out and just kind of pretending that it was a thesis paper and trying to figure out like what are all the points I need to hit. Let's put those in order and then let's see if we can make enough to get each of those points into a chapter. And then just as excuse me, as I sort of did more research and found more things, sort of filled it out enough, and then it was the thing of having to get it all together enough to have a proposal that a publisher would actually say, this is obviously a book and not just a article. It was really just a lot of reading and a lot of kind of thinking through it. And once I got the idea in my head, everything fed into it. So it was pretty easy to see how it would come together. And it did. I wish I had like a good answer of like, the muses speak to me or something.
Right.
It's really just get this need to do it, right. And then it becomes something that I can't not do, and then I make it all fit right. Somehow.
You have a methodology you like to call the system, where you start every day with a high protein breakfast and then a visit to the NASA Research Center of your choosing. Did you get a chance to do a lot of like I don't know, like digging through crazy engineer benches and like looking through old file folders and things like that? Like, did you get a chance to go deeper and talk to people that maybe we, who just constantly just keep trolling Wikipedia, maybe didn't find?
A little bit, but honestly not as much as I would have liked, just because I had time constraints, budgetary constraints, and also a lot of this stuff, thankfully, the era is interesting enough that a lot of it is digitized. I did get to a couple archives at NASA, and I did get to the National Archives in Maryland. I forget what city it's in off the top of my head, but most of the most useful stuff, and a lot of it, I mean, thank you, digital age, emailing historians at various sites and saying, I'm looking for this report. I know this exists. Can you give me anything? And they'd say, we don't have this. This was, we don't have a record. It was destroyed after it was talked about in this book. Or, yes, here's a scanned copy, and that was the best. So a lot of it just came from finding the right historians in the right places, in the right archives, and getting the material. But a lot of it's creative Googling. You can find a lot of this stuff, and like the Internet Archive has digitized versions of things that you would never think to look up, which is really handy. So.
And did you get a chance to talk to some heroes?
Unfortunately for this, not really. I think almost everybody. So the book is very narrative driven. It's readable history, but it's history for the layman. So it's quite readable and narrative. So I sort of have historical figures as characters, but I think almost everyone that I discuss has passed. So I wasn't able to get in touch with anybody and say, tell me about this test and stuff. And that's sort of where it became difficult, because I'm really relying on memoirs that people have written, but some memoirs disagree with other people's memoirs, and then disagree with, there are some historians in the field that I absolutely know are worth their salt. If they disagree, it's sort of like, okay, I have no idea why these things are all saying the different things about this one night, the way one thing happened. So yeah, unfortunately I wasn't able to talk to as many people as I would have liked for this one, but still got to dig into some really interesting things.
Yeah. So I got a question here from Nancy Graziano, and this is sort of a good segue. I just want to add that your Apollo 13 live tweets and your other live tweet projects are awesome and really provide insight into what happened behind the scenes. Thanks for doing that. So for people who don't follow Amy Shira Teitel, first, shame on you. Second, what she does is AST Vintage Space. What she does, which is amazing, is for some of the big anniversaries of these missions, she will live tweet the mission as if it's actually happening, even though it happened 45 years ago and Twitter didn't exist. So, so what's going on right now? Where are we right now? To Apollo 13.
Apollo 13 right now, the crew is probably, I feel like they probably have showered. They're on the USS Iwo Jima. They've splashed down. They've probably already talked to the president. They're probably kind of recovering and just really happy to not be cold right now. They splashed down about, I want to say like 3 hours ago. Yeah, about there. So yeah, unfortunately, guys, it's over. But I will be storifying it if I can figure out how to do that, because it is actually really interesting. I've done them before, but Apollo 13 was so interesting because we all know the movie and how it happens in an hour and a half, and like the scene, the oxygen tank ruptures, and everyone's just going absolutely crazy, and then like a minute later, Tom Hanks is like, "We're venting something into space. It's got to be the oxygen." It's like, nope, that's not what happened. Obviously, because it's Hollywood. But it's really interesting to sort of see how slowly all of that came apart, and just how long it took them to figure out how, okay, I think it was like an hour and a half later, Fred Hayes mentioned something about we're looking at using LEM consumables. And that there was no mention of like, we're going to use it as a lifeboat. It's just sort of, we're going to start looking at contingencies all over the place. And I actually got to go, so I got to meet Jim Lovell a few weeks ago, which was like awesome. And Gene Kranz, which is awesome, at an Apollo 13 anniversary event in San Diego. And there were 4 panels with these guys, Glenn Lunny was there, Jerry Griffin was there, Gene Cernan, all these great guys sort of recounting how it happened. And just, they sort of said, like, we thought, I think Gene Kranz said that they thought that it was an instrumentation issue, like they said in the movie, and that the idea was, well, let's just get them to bed and we'll deal with it while they're sleeping. And then it just sort of didn't stop happening. And like within 5 minutes, the trench had like 15 different options for return, and just like kept weeding them out and just like throwing ones out as new information came out. That it was frantic, but it was very slow frantic. So it was really interesting to hear from those guys how it happened, and then to read the transcript and actually see how it happened. Very cool.
So is the movie reasonably accurate or not reasonably accurate?
It's reasonably accurate within the time frame that you can have in a movie. So Jerry Griffin, who was an Apollo flight director, was actually one of the consultants on that movie, and I actually spoke to him about it once, and he said that it's very accurate, and he made sure that it was so. Except that Ron Howard, he said, had to put a lot of like background movement in it to make it look more frantic, because really they were very measured about sort of approaching the problem. And if you listen to the transcript, any of the audio at all, you can hear them just sort of, oh, we've had a problem. It's not like this frantic call. I mean, there's a little bit of panic, but it's very measured. It's very like, I'm a pilot, this is my job. Let's address the problem as it's coming up. But yeah, no, the movie is reasonably accurate within a Hollywood standard.
Well, I think that the way you've done this, and I don't remember which was the first one that you did, but I sort of freaked out the first time you did it and was telling everybody to go and follow you. I'm trying to remember which was it, like Apollo 12?
It was Apollo 8.
It was Apollo 8, that's right.
The first one I did was Apollo 8, because how many more articles do we need to write about how it was a really important mission and kind of a beautiful moment in human history? I thought, let's go along for the ride and actually see what that was like. And turns out it was a lot of fun, and people liked it. I missed 7 and 9 just because I didn't think about it for 7, and I was disorganized for 9. But yeah, 10, 11, 12, it's been neat. But of course, 13 has been the most popular, just because everyone has seen the movie, and it's such a recognizable mission. So
how many tweets
it's been fun
do you
as
think
people
you've done?
sort of share stories.
How many tweets did you do?
I mean, I could tell you, probably in the range of 500. I want to say.
Over the course of
a lot.
There
were a lot of tweets over the course of 6 days. Yeah,
and I think
it's fun. It's nutty for sure.
Practically, the way you did it, right, is you wrote it all in advance, queued them all up for the right times that they were going to happen, and then turned them loose, right?
Excuse me. Yeah. I don't have a great app for it, but I just use like a web-based. 573 tweets for Apollo 13. So what I do, my friend Matt helped me out with this one. He created a spreadsheet on a Google Drive that takes the ground elapsed time and switches it into Eastern Daylight Times, because the transcripts are all ground time, doesn't tell you the time and date. So put the time in, it fixes it, I put the date in, and then I write a tweet, and then I just have this spreadsheet of all the tweets. And I type them up. I try to take the transcript verbatim just because I think that's more interesting. But then it's literally copying and pasting them and scheduling every one of them and adding images if it works.
But you're also giving context too, like you're saying when events have happened and things like that. So no, I think, I think that's...
There's a lot of technical stuff in there, so it's sort of like, I'm not going to go through this power-up procedure and tell you what circuit breakers are open and what ones are closed. I'm just going to say, like, we're getting the power-up procedure for the command module, and it's a long one, guys.
Yeah. So I think what you've taken on, it's like performance art. I think you did a great job, and I think people really got excited about it, and so now you have to keep going. Is all I'm saying. I'm sorry.
Well, at least I have a year before Apollo 14, so it's the 45th anniversary.
Right. So just
some time.
Queue up a few tweets in advance, and every day, and you'll be okay.
Yeah.
So let's see, we've got one last question for you. Eric Burnson asks, what's one of the coolest facts or stories that you learned about while researching your book?
Oh. That's a... I should have a better answer off the top of my head than
You're going to have a bunch of interviews between now and after the book. I might recommend that you get some of these. This is practice, Amy.
This is great practice. I'm realizing right now this is great practice. At least I'm among friends here. There were a lot of really neat things. I think my favorite was unpacking the Air Force and Army missile and space programs, because they're incredibly detailed, like down to, it was Von Braun writing these things for the Army. He knew how to get to Mars. He knew how to get to the moon. So they're these completely detailed, kind of nutty programs that I finally get to dig into and sort of see where they fit in the context of history, where why they were competing, basically doing the same thing, and sort of seeing that inter-service rivalry and who wanted to go to the moon how, and who had the weirdest proposals. One of my favorites, because the industry, like the aviation industry, was getting into it too in like pre and post Sputnik. I think it was Convair had an idea for a steel mesh parachute spacecraft, which I just don't understand how this could possibly work. I should really ask one of my engineer friends. But basically, it would be a giant steel parachute that would somehow slow this pod out of orbit, and then that steel mesh parachute would actually slow it to a landing. It just sounds so heavy.
Some kind of on the moon, some kind of.
No, on Earth.
Oh, on Earth.
Yeah, this was like, oh, we need to get a man in space right away. Well, let's put him up in this little steel ball and then use a steel parachute to get him home safely. Like, that doesn't sound like that should work. Yeah, that's not a fact, but that's sort of
an interesting. Well, there's a million of those. One of the things that you've done, which was really great, is looking back at some of the crazy missions that were on the books that were planned, like a manned mission to Venus that never got done. There's so many of those, and we're kind of living in them right now, right? Like, well, right now, when you think about
it's interesting.
I was just going to say
it's
the
interesting.
mission to collect a rock from an asteroid, or to orbit an asteroid, or to send people back to the moon, or whatever. There's all these missions right now that we're seeing that will probably get all canceled. There's 50 years of canceled missions.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
To look at.
And there's a lot of them are coming back. I think Bigelow was looking at an inflatable habitat in space. Like, this is something that Langley was looking at in 1962 and had a full proposal for. So you kind of see the inspiration from way back in the day when they had tons of money and tons of guts to just kind of propose any crazy thing. And that stuff's a lot of fun too. Although I should say that my book ends the day that NASA opens. So none of that is in this.
Well, I would love to sort of do a future history, like an alternative future history of NASA, starting from the end of, like, maybe Skylab, right?
Yeah.
And then just move forward from there, following the timeline and the missions that they had planned at that point. Like, what was going to be after Skylab? What was going to be after that next mission? When people had, as you said, they had the budget and they had the bravado, and they were just like, let's just keep rolling.
Yeah. Yeah, if you imagine if you imagine a world where NASA still had 4% of the GDP, and it didn't drop off in the late 60s, and all the things that they were planning actually got passed, what would have happened? Where could we be?
Well, let's move on to the...
that's a dream.
Yeah, I know, for sure. I just gave you your next book. So, you're welcome. Let's move on. Although you're probably never going to write another book, right?
I've got a couple more up here. Yeah, don't worry.
The fact that you want to write another book while you're in the process of writing a book, that's very admirable, because that's when people's wills are destroyed.
As hard as this is, and as much as it's, like, terrifying right now, I love it. I just love digging into this, and I love seeing it come together and researching it. So, like, yeah, I want to do it again.
Okay, well, let's move on to the news. So, Morgan Rehnberg, did you watch the new Star Wars trailer?
Several times.
Awesome.
I have indeed watched it, and I think what impressed me much more than the new Star Wars trailer was the footage that came out of the convention that's happening right now, of that little droid rolling around on stage. If you thought that little ball with the strange half sphere suspended above it was all computer generated, you'd be entirely wrong. That was a prop the whole way through, and my jaw dropped when I saw this thing booking around the stage, spinning in all directions, looking around, real as life. And I thought that was just really sort of reminded me that there still is movie magic out there sometimes.
And Amy, I know you've been sequestered for a while, but there's going to be a new Star Wars movie coming out.
I actually did see the trailer.
Saw the trailer? Yeah.
Yeah. I have no thoughts. My only thought was, why is Harrison Ford in this? I mean, I don't know why, but like, I have not.
Yeah.
Chewie
aged a lot better than Han did.
He definitely did. I'm not a huge Star Wars fan, and I'm not a Star Trek fan, so I sort of see this and I'm like, okay, I might never see it. I still haven't seen Interstellar.
It's all right.
That's okay.
Well, let's move on to the actual news. So I think the big news is This Week in Musk, the Falcon 9 almost landed.
It did. It got real close. It lifted off a couple of days ago on its 6th supply trip to the International Space Station, and it successfully delivered the Dragon capsule to orbit, and I believe that it's rendezvoused with the space station now, although I don't think it's been brought aboard. The equipment hasn't been brought aboard. Most notable amongst the things on board was the Espresso machine, ISS Espresso, the first coffee machine in space. It's difficult to imagine that it took this long to get that to happen, but I'm sure that the astronauts are quite happy about that.
Morale will be at an all-time high.
But what I think most people were looking at more closely was what happened after Dragon separated from the Falcon 9, and that was the attempt to land the first stage of the Falcon 9 on this floating barge out in the Atlantic Ocean. And video came out almost immediately showing that the stage touched down on the surface of the barge pretty forcefully, but square on the middle of the barge, before kind of wobbling for a second and then tipping over and catching on fire. And just yesterday,
I would be glad to show you that video, but then YouTube would give me a violation, and then I would have my YouTube channel pulled, even though I'd be using a publicly available video, because some Brazilian television company claimed it. So you're going to have to imagine in your mind a rocket almost landing on the platform, and then trying at the last minute. You could see the little maneuvering thrusters at the top really trying to get it back to vertical, and then it failed, and it fell over, and then it went...
Yeah, so last night, video leaked out from the barge showing the close-up landing attempt. And SpaceX CEO Elon Musk had originally said that it was a valve problem in one of the thrusters, kept it from coming down perfectly balanced. He later retracted that by deleting that tweet. And some rumors have been going around suggesting that one of the landing legs might have buckled. You can see it land quite forcefully on the surface of the barge. And that's always going to be the case, because the Falcon 9 engines are not capable of throttling down enough to actually hover. And so it's always going to be a smack and not a soft touchdown. But if it comes down square, the legs are designed to absorb that impact and to land the rocket. And they're still giving it an 80% chance of succeeding by the end of the year. I think they have about a half a dozen launches in the second half of this year, and so they're going to have a few more tries at this by the end of 2015.
And reminder, this is hard.
Yes, very difficult.
So rocket science is hard, guys.
Rocket science is hard, yeah.
They don't call it rocket science for nothing.
What do you think, Amy? Are you excited at the prospects of... I mean, that's such a leading question. Do you think they'll make it? Do you think this is going to happen? Do you think we will have reusable rockets?
I do not know, because SpaceX, of course, not being public, has no need to put their stuff out there for someone like me to read and see what their actual technology is. So, I mean, it's sort of hard to say. I think it would be great. I don't know whether it would actually be financially viable like they say it is, because, again, I haven't seen any of the numbers. It's one of those things. Like SpaceX, they build rockets that work. So the odds of them creating something like this that'll work, a recoverable stage, is probably high. But it's one of those things of like, I'll kind of believe it when I see it, because right now it doesn't look so good.
Seems pretty close. I don't know.
Like it's been there, but it's all.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think the bigger question is whether they can make the second stage reusable. That sounds really tough.
I was watching the launch and wondering how that would work. Like, I just don't have a good sense of like where
further down range. The same thing would happen.
Is it just further down range?
Well,
yes.
More than further down range, it comes from a lot higher.
Yeah.
And so it has to arrest from a much higher velocity, which was going to require putting more propellant on board to slow it down on the descent burn, which will make the overall thing heavier. Yeah.
This is my question that I don't understand. Like, I can't get my head around. At what point are you saving money for refurbishing the stage, but spending more money to launch the fuel you need to get the rocket stage back to not refurbish it?
You're not. I mean,
where is that balance?
No, well, Elon Musk said there's about $100,000 worth of fuel in a rocket. And the rocket itself is $100 million. So it's off by a factor of math.
Okay.
Yeah.
1,000.
I'm just wondering if, because NASA tried this. See, it all comes back. NASA tried this in the 60s. They tried briefly to use the paraglider to bring down the first stage of, they didn't try. They developed concepts for it. They also tried a rotor re-entry system. There's briefly talk of a piloted first stage of the Saturn rocket. And none of these things worked because they were ultimately crazy in the timeline of Apollo. But I feel like the glider would be the most logical thing to try, only because then you're not dealing with something that will blow up on fire. I don't know. Again, I'm not an engineer.
The thrust-to-weight ratio of the engines on the Falcon 9 is exemplary in comparison to rockets of the past, so they can achieve a lot more with a lot less fuel and a lot less mass. And I think that's working in their benefit. I don't know if the rocket could survive the stresses if you try to turn it into a glider. You then sort of have stresses not vertically along the body of the rocket, but perpendicular to that, and you might end up, twisting the rocket, and that would probably, you'd have to reinforce it, and then you're talking about more structure and more mass.
I'd love to see but that's a story. You should definitely dig up those old gliders and show what. Like. I love it. I'll assign you that story to yourself, Amy. Okay, because I'm no longer your story editor. All right, so let's move on. So we're going to Europa, and NASA's and ESA are going to work on this together. This sounds familiar.
We hope so. So we're hopefully going to Europa. But before that happens, we got to get the budget down. The Europa Clipper, which is the proposed mission to go to the Jupiter system, not go in orbit about Jupiter, but go in orbit about Saturn, but not go in orbit about Europa, but to go in orbit about Jupiter, make about 45 or 50 flybys of the moon, studying its surface and its interior, costs a ton of money, something like $4.5 billion, which would be way more than NASA has spent on any unmanned mission in a long time. And so they need to get that cost down substantially. And one way to do that is to involve other partners. And so they're kind of following the model of Cassini-Huygens here, where NASA built the Cassini spacecraft, which has been orbiting Saturn now for more than a decade, studying the planet, the rings, the moons, etc. And ESA sent the Huygens lander. This is a separate spacecraft that was connected to Cassini at launch and traveled in the cruise phase all the way to Saturn with Cassini. And then once Cassini had studied and evaluated the moon Titan, they released Huygens into Titan, where it landed and made the first observations from the surface of Titan. And they think they can do the same thing for Europa. They think they can go make some of these flybys of Europa, look for a safe landing spot, and then drop this small lander to make some basic measurements from the surface, kind of in the same way that Philae and Rosetta worked last year. And this is really important to do it this way because you couldn't just send a lander right now. Even if you had all the money in the world, you couldn't do it because we don't have maps of the surface of Europa that are sufficiently good to see these things. The best resolution we have on the surface is something like 30 to 100 meters for every pixel. So we're talking about missing, apartment building size boulders when looking to land, and you need a very flat place to execute an unmanned landing. And so the Clipper provided by NASA will allow us to gain the imagery necessary to evaluate and pick both a safe and a scientifically interesting place to land. And then this lander from ESA can go to the surface and make in situ measurements of things like what is that brown gunk that we see on the surface, how dense is the ice right at the surface, questions like that.
How often do the Jovian space whales breach to breathe?
Exactly, yeah. And so ESA is stressing that they haven't committed to anything here and that they operate on a proposal-based system. And so if a group of ESA scientists proposes to attach a lander to the Clipper, then it'll go through the typical proposal system, and if that proposal wins out, then they will join onto the Clipper. And so there's no guarantee either that NASA will go forward with the Clipper, although right now that seems like it's more certain than not, or that ESA will choose to participate in this mission as well. But if it happens, we're talking launch in the mid-2020s, arrival at Jupiter in the late 2020s, early 2030s, and then studying Jupiter and Europa sort of in the early 2030s.
Fantastic.
It would be so cool.
It would be so cool. Space is
I want
big.
to go to there.
I know. Don't you want to swim with the Jovian space whales? I'm telling you.
So we started today talking about the troubles of landing on Mars, and every problem you have on Mars, you have 10 times worse trying to land on any other body in the solar system, because a moon like Europa has no atmosphere, and so you're completely without the ability to do any sort of aerobraking or any other kind of atmospheric-based slowing down. And so you need to rely on rocket fuel and rocket jets in order to make that landing. And so that severely limits the capabilities we have of putting things on the surface of worlds like Mercury or the Moon or Europa or Enceladus, places like that.
Well, I mean, Europa is so much
the benefit of being able to design. Sorry, go ahead. Amy. I was going to say that having looked at the moon landings a lot, like I do, no atmosphere does give you the benefit of not having to worry about things like heat shields and the fiery bit of that reentry. So at least you can design something very specific and sort of make it a purpose-built thing, which of course takes money, which is why we don't do it very much. We reuse things that we have, i.e. continually going to Mars. But yeah.
Yeah, when you think about the places that we've landed on, right? Venus, which has a very thick atmosphere and descended, was very easy to descend through, although a very bad place to end up on. And Titan, which has an atmosphere like twice as dense as Earth. So again, an easier place to use a parachute on.
Yeah, but no rocket.
But everything else is Mars or worse. So we're all out of thick atmospheres to land in. Well, let's move on, because I know we got not a lot of time left. So let's talk about whether or not Rosetta's comet is magnetic.
Yeah, so this is one of the coolest results, I think, that has come out of the Philae Rosetta landing so far. If you remember back last year, Rosetta approached Comet 67P, Churyumov-Gerasimenko, and dropped Philae onto the surface, where it was supposed to fire a harpoon, ratchet itself into the surface, and make observations for a few weeks. Instead, what happened is the harpoon didn't fire, the rocket supposed to pin it to the surface didn't fire, and it bounced. And it traveled several kilometers, hit the surface, and it bounced again. And it ended up in shadow next to a cliff with a relatively reduced mission timeline. And so you'd think that was a bad thing. And it was for a lot of things, but for understanding the magnetic field of the comet, this was actually a really good thing, because Philae was equipped with a magnetometer, which is a piece of equipment that measures the local magnetic field, and they wanted to see what the magnetic field was like at the surface of the comet. And the original mission, they were only going to see this at one point, which is where where Philae originally touched down. But when it bounced, they got to see it not just at that first point, but also the second point where it hit, and also the third point where it hit, and every point in between. And so they got both a spatial, in terms of XY, kind of across the surface of the comet, and a vertical measure of the magnetic field of the comet. And they're able to find basically no magnetic field. Philae detected no differences in the magnetic field at any location, which tells us that it's dominated not by the magnetic field of the comet, but by the solar wind that the comet is passing through. And that, on the scale of a few kilometers that Philae would have traveled, is constant or very near constant. And so this has really helped us unlock an understanding of magnetic fields on comets that we wouldn't have gotten even if this mission had worked successfully.
I am going to show a picture now that is completely unrelated to what you just said, Morgan. So check this out. Amy, does that look familiar to you?
Gemini TTV.
Yeah. So Tom Nathie just shared this picture. So this is note the pilot. So
yeah. That's a small scale Gemini landing vehicle that they tried to land Gemini on a runway with this two-lobed sail. This is actually what I wrote my master's thesis on. And it's nuts. And it actually sent 2 of the 3 pilots that flew it to the hospital. And one of the pilots who did not go to the hospital was Jack Swigert. Fun fact.
So imagine that, but scaled up with a rocket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's I think that thing is actually in the Udvar Hazy Museum in Washington. Go see it, guys. I've never seen it.
It's a cool museum if you've never been.
No, I've never been there.
People go and send me pictures, and I'm just dying to get there. It looks great.
All right, well let's move on. I apologize if I'm not asking a million questions, but we've got not a lot of time left, and a few more things I want to show people. So one sort of last big piece of news, I think, is that New Horizons is getting close to Pluto.
It is, and it took for the first time a color photograph of Pluto. Maybe, I don't know if you have that to put up as well.
I'll share it. Yeah, just give me a second. You talk, I will share.
And what you can see is you can easily see Pluto and its largest moon, Charon, in this image. And it's not a particularly high-resolution image because the main science camera of New Horizons shoots only in black and white. And if you want to know why that is, I wrote an article for Universe Today back in December when Philae landed talking about the value of shooting in black and white in space. As opposed to color, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But they do also have an imager that's 4 times lower in resolution on board that can shoot in some particular colors. And if you are clever about how you combine them, then you can make kind of a pseudo true color image, and that's what we got here. And so we're just about 6 weeks away now from New Horizons achieving better spatial resolution of observations of Pluto than Hubble has. So there you can see this nice picture of Pluto and Charon, its largest moon. And within 2 months, we'll be seeing the best pictures that humans have ever seen of the surface of Pluto. And then it'll get better for about the next 6 weeks as it approaches from, well, for the next 2.5 months as it approaches from May through July 15th when it makes its closest approach. And so we'll get almost every day a better picture of Pluto than we've ever had before. And it's going to make for a really exciting time. Sort of as we've got a preview of that with Ceres, the closer you sort of inch to things, you start to see these strange features, and you can speculate about what they are, knowing that soon you'll know with much more certainty what you're looking at. And so it's going to be a really exciting summer for New Horizons and for Ceres.
Yeah, and it's going to be very different from the way Rosetta worked, because with Rosetta, the spacecraft spent a long time, it got a little bit closer, and then the Philae tried to land, and then there's still more science research coming out of it. But this is just going to be, it's just going to go right past.
Right. And although it will feel kind of like that, because the data collected in the sort of 3-day period closest to Pluto is going to take 1.5 years to return from the spacecraft back to Earth. And so although we're going to do all of our science in pretty much the blink of an eye on the scale of this 10-year mission, it's going to take a long time to get all of those results, pictures, and measurements back for us to look at here on Earth.
Yeah, yeah. So I know we've got to.
Can I make a related announcement to New Horizons, just because I actually haven't told the internet about this, and I feel like they should know?
Sure.
So I'm actually working on New Horizons as a communicator, and I'm going to be doing a lot of live tweeting and videos from APL during Encounter. So if you want to see what it's like to be there when this happens, because I get to be there when it happens, definitely follow me on Twitter, because I'm going to be geeking out really hard like all summer.
That sounds familiar, like what happened with Curiosity.
Yeah, only this time I get to be in mission control.
That's awesome. As opposed to jammed into the.
As opposed to jammed into the press room. But yeah, it's going to be pretty interesting. So yeah, if awesome. I'll be bringing you guys some pretty personal updates from that.
And they're really tapping into all of us, because I've already hosted 2 hangouts with the folks from the Horizon Science team, New Horizon Science team with Alan Stern. So
it's a huge thing to do to finally go to Pluto, so we should all be aware of this, guys.
I can't wait. I'm so
excited.
Tell your friends we're going to Pluto. Let's wrap things up quickly. Amy Shira Teitel, where can people find out more about you?
Best places right now are Twitter, AST Vintage Space, and my YouTube channel, which is also called Vintage Space. Weekly videos going up Tuesdays and Fridays. Today's is a little bit late, but all space history all the time, and also my blog, also called Vintage Space, is at Popular Science. It's popsci.com/blog-network/vintage-space. Just Google it.
And that book again?
And that book again is Breaking the Chains of Gravity, and I'll be talking about it more starting in the next couple months once it's actually sort of in the publication cycle. Right now, it's still in the finishing editing cycle. So yeah, it's coming. You guys will hear about it, I promise.
Feel free to come back and join us again when people can actually purchase the book, and we'll be glad to sort of shill it for you. So
I will happily provide some copies for you to shill out.
Nice. Morgan, where can people find out more?
You can follow me on Twitter at Morgan Rehnberg, or you can check out my spiffy new website at morganrehnberg.com. Keeping it pretty simple here.
Fantastic. Of course, I'm Fraser Cain. You can check out my YouTube channel at YouTube/Universe Today, I think. And of course, you can go to the website, universetoday.com. You can follow me on Twitter, fcain. We're actually just shooting today another big schwack of videos. So we've got some crazy topics like, can you put a black hole in your pocket? Can you live on Jupiter? No. And some other ideas.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert, what is the shape of space, things like that. So if you haven't already, you're watching the video on my YouTube channel, go ahead and click subscribe, and we would love to get your help. You can also go to my Patreon page, go to patreon.com/universetoday, and you can help contribute to what we're doing to help bring you space and astronomy content. We really appreciate all of your help. So with that, thank you very much to Amy Shira Teitel. Thank you to Morgan Rehnberg. Next week, big guest. So we're going to be talking to Bas Lansdorp from Mars One. And as I mentioned, I certainly hope they don't look back through the archive of videos, and they really just show up and we'll interview them. So maybe Bas or someone else from his team. And so we'll get a chance to talk about Mars One and sort of what's happened so far and some of the controversy. And it's going to be great to sort of hear right from the horse's mouth about what's happening with the project. So come back next week. That would be great. All right, and a big thank you to the WSH crew, the Weekly Space Hangout crew. This is the Google Plus community that has helped organize this and other guests for joining us here on the Weekly Space Hangout. And we really couldn't do the show without them. They really are the yin to our yang. So thank you so much to all the members there. And if you're looking for a really dedicated group of space fans, go check out the WSH crew. You can just go to bit.ly/WSH crew. Either capitalization works just fine, and join them. And they're good people. So thanks again to Amy, Morgan. Thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you all next week.